A taxi is a useful means of transportation in many ways. While public transportation like buses and subways are cheap, you have to travel to a designated bus stop or station at a scheduled time. In particular, since their operating hours are fixed, their use is limited in the late-night hours after midnight. Of course, Seoul's bus system has dedicated late-night routes, sometimes called owl buses, but they also have the disadvantage of having limited operating areas. In such cases, taxis prove their worth as a very useful mode of transport. A taxi is a vehicle that can take passengers to their desired destination anywhere there is a road. This service began with the popularization of automobiles and continues to this day. The first taxis to operate in Korea were two American-made Ford Model T cars, which a wealthy Seoul resident and two Japanese individuals brought in 1912. They were rented out on an hourly basis within Seoul. Unlike today's taxis, the service at that time was considered to be on par with a limousine service. The fares were extremely high. A one-way trip from what is now Gwangju Metropolitan City to Mokpo City, about 89 kilometers, cost 18 won, and a one-way trip from Jeonju City to Uksan City, about 28 kilometers, was 2 won. Considering that the price of 60 kilograms of rice was about 6 to 7 won at the time, the fares were exorbitant. Because of this, only the wealthy or relatively affluent Japanese could afford to use the first taxi service. The first commercial taxi company to be founded on the Korean peninsula was the Jongshung Taxi Company, established by Kenzo Nomura in 1919. This company began commercial operations with two American-made Dodge sedans, primarily serving Japanese residents on the peninsula. Following this, in 1920, a new taxi company called the Gyeoram Automobile Association was established, which began taxi operations with 4 luxury sedans. However, since there were no meters to calculate fares at that time, they generally operated as chartered or hourly taxis. Then, in 1926, a company named Asahi Taxi Company first introduced modern taxis equipped with meters, applying a distance-based fare system and beginning modern taxi services. The 1950s, after the Korean War, was both the dawn of the Korean automobile industry and the beginning of the popularization of taxis. The C-Bal, a Jeep-type car manufactured by Gukya Vehicle Manufacturing, was mainly used as a taxi after the war. This car was made by reconditioning military Jeep vehicles that had been decommissioned or sold off by the U.S. military. Because of its sturdy design, which was well suited for the poor road conditions of the time, more than 500 units were sold for taxi use. As a result, the C-Bal is better known by its nickname, the C-Bal taxi. However, the era of the C-Bal taxi came to an end in the 1960s. The Saenara Motor Company, founded under the leadership of President Park Chung-hee's Central Intelligence Agency, began importing 400 Nissan Bluebird vehicles from Japan. Saenara Motor Company, established through the Automobile Industry Promotion Act, enacted by the military government in 1961, effectively cut off the domestic automobile industry, which had just begun to sprout. This caused a great backlash from the domestic auto industry, which had been limited to reconditioning decommissioned military vehicles. Saenara Motor Company's Saenara Yangjungmin, or Western-style beauty, quickly penetrated the domestic car market. In 1962, as the Asian Film Festival was approaching, the company changed its plan to sell its cars for foreign tourists to selling them all to be used as general taxis. As a result, taxi companies nationwide began to abandon their old and crude C-Bal taxis in favor of Saenara cars, leading to the rapid decline of the C-Bal taxi. Around this time, modern meters were also installed in taxis operating in Seoul, and the taxi transportation system became more established. In 1965, the authority to approve taxi fares was delegated to the heads of local governments, mayors and governors, leading to a change in the way the taxi transportation business was operated. The taxi industry began its reorganization with the revision of Article 5 of the Plan for the Corporatization of Automobile Transport Businesses, Ministry of Transport Notice No. 1111, which redefined the requirements for a personal taxi license. The following year, in 1966, taxi fares were also readjusted. In Seoul, the basic fare was adjusted to 60 won for 2 kilometers, with an additional fare of 10 won per 500 meters, and a waiting fee of 40 won per 10 minutes. In other regions, city, provincial authorities could adjust fares within a range of 35 to 60%, considering road conditions and transportation demand. This was changed back to the same level as Seoul in 1967. And it was during this process that the concept of a personal taxi, 기안 began. In the automobile industry, Shinjin Motors acquired the bankrupt Saenara Motor Company's factory after the Four Scandals incident. Shinjin then partnered with Japan's Toyota Motor Company to produce passenger cars like the Shinjin Corona, which were then sold as taxis. The Shinjin Corona was well suited to the road conditions of the time and quickly became the most popular taxi model in the country. Later, Hyundai Motor Company, in a technical partnership with Ford Motor Company, produced the Cortina, creating a duopoly in the taxi industry. Since the first automobiles were introduced to the Korean peninsula, taxis have begun to appear. Starting in the early 1900s during the Korean Empire, taxis operated as a chartered or hourly service. During the Japanese colonial period, they served as a means of transport for the Japanese. After liberation, they were operated on a small scale under a separate taxi system established by the U.S. military government. After the Korean War, which left the entire country in ruins, the automobile industry began to take off, and the taxi business started to come alive again. The car that revitalized the taxi business in Korea was the C-Bal, manufactured by Gukya Vehicle Manufacturing, which was built from decommissioned or civilian-sold military jeeps. Because a large number of these cars were produced and sold to meet the demand for taxis, the car became strongly associated with taxis, earning it the nickname C-Bal Taxi. Afterward, with the establishment of the Third Republic following Park Chung-hee's military coup, a large number of Nissan Bluebirds were imported into the country through Saenara Motor Company, and many of these were sold as general taxis. After Saenara Motor Company went bankrupt due to the Four Scandals incident, Shinjin Motors took over and began licensed production of the Toyota Corona from Japan. A significant portion of this model was sold as taxis, and with the addition of Hyundai Motor Company's Cortina, an era of competition began in the taxi industry with more than two types of vehicles. From small to mid-sized taxis. In the 1970s, as the Korean automobile industry rapidly changed, taxi models became even more diverse. Hyundai Motor Company released Korea's first independent model, the Pony, and Kia Industries, now Kia, produced the Brisa through a technical partnership with Japan's Mazda, both of which gained significant attention in the taxi industry. Up until the 1960s and 1970s, small passenger cars were mostly used as taxis. The reason for a major shift was the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Seoul Olympics. These two large-scale international events required South Korea to make a fundamental change to welcome the many foreign guests expected to visit. The new military government of Chun Doo-won, in power at the time, not only greatly expanded Gimpo International Airport but also began to push a policy of converting existing small taxis into mid-sized ones. This was because, at the time, there were only 201 mid-sized taxis in the entire country. Following this policy, car manufacturers had to hurriedly develop mid-sized taxi models. A representative model developed due to this policy was the Hyundai Stella. The Stella was based on the lower design of the previously produced Cortina but featured a larger body and was equipped with high-performance 1.4-liter and 1.6-liter Mitsubishi engines. This model gained explosive popularity not only as a taxi but also as a personal car, as it offered the size and convenience of a mid-sized car at an affordable price. At the same time, Kia Industries also entered the mid-sized taxi competition by releasing the Concorde, a mid-sized sedan with a 1.8-liter engine, to capture the growing demand for mid-sized taxis. The evolution of modern taxis. Around this time, the standard for Korean taxis completely shifted from small passenger cars to mid-sized ones, a trend that continues to this day, decades later. The best-selling taxi model today is the Hyundai Sonata, but not the current 8th generation, DN8, model sold to the public. The model for taxis is still based on the 7th generation, LF, which is now sold exclusively for taxi use. With the discontinuation of the taxi model for Kia's K5, the Sonata became the only model available exclusively for taxi service. However, there have been attempts to innovate the taxi industry. The deluxe taxi system, introduced in 1992, was an expansion of the personal taxi model. It used mid-sized or larger passenger cars with an engine displacement of over 1,900 cc to provide a more premium service. While the fare is higher than for regular taxis, it applies a mutual combined system, adding only a distance-based or time-based fee. In 2009, Seoul began a pilot program for the first LPG hybrid taxis in the country, and Sungnam City has been operating compact car taxis since 2010. Compact car taxis, in particular, received positive feedback from users who needed to travel short distances within the city due to their low basic fare and agility. However, most compact and subcompact taxis have reportedly disappeared because they were not economically viable. Furthermore, since July 2015, personal and deluxe taxis have also been allowed to use high-end imported cars. A premium taxi system, which is even more luxurious than deluxe taxis and essentially a limousine service, has also been introduced. These taxis use large F-segment sedans or modified MPVs like the Carnival, often converted into high limousines. They offer a higher level of service with various amenities and a comfortable ride. In addition, in areas like islands or mountainous regions where access by a regular sedan is difficult, SUV-type taxis are also operated. These SUV taxis are better suited for such routes due to their higher ground clearance and four-wheel drive functionality compared to passenger sedans. There are also call taxis for people with disabilities to ensure their right to mobility. These are typically modified MPV vehicles with ample space. More recently, with the rapid development of electric vehicle (EV) technology and government subsidies, a significant number of electric taxis are now in operation. In the early stages of EV taxi adoption, models like the Hyundai Ioniq Electric and Kona EV, and Kia Niro EV were introduced for taxi use. Currently, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 is sold as a taxi model, and Kia has launched the Niro Plus, a purpose-built mobility model developed specifically for commercial use, to penetrate the commercial vehicle market. Source: Motoya, link to motoya.co.kr.